In a land once ruled by ruthless giants, a fierce tribe of warrior women rise from the ashes of betrayal and bloodshed to reclaim their destiny. Bound by tradition but driven by the whisper of freedom, one woman dares to challenge a centuries-old empire. Sit back and let the story unfold, a tale of courage, rebellion, and the fire it takes to rewrite fate. Long ago, in an ancient corner of Africa, there lived a tribe unlike any other, the Yoya. They were a fierce and revered sisterhood, a powerful lineage of warrior women whose strength echoed across the lands. But the story of Yoya began not with them, but with the men who came before. These men were once giants, towering figures of brutality and dominance. They thirsted for blood, thrived on war, and crushed anyone who dared to stand in their way. Kingdoms trembled at the mere mention of them. But history has always taught us one thing: no matter how mighty men become, there are always forces even greater. The kings of neighboring lands, driven by fear and desperation, formed a secret alliance. They called themselves the Circle. Bound by a common enemy, they united their armies into a single, unstoppable force. And leading them was none other than the Oba of Goti, Kiba, a man hailed as the Oba of Kings. Kiba was not just a ruler. He was a legend, cold, brilliant, and ruthlessly strategic. His mind was a battlefield of its own. He could dismantle an army before its soldiers even realized the war had begun. Against brute strength, he brought cunning. Against chaos, he brought precision. Even the merciless Yoya men, feared for their savagery and insatiable bloodlust, were no match for Kiba's genius. With swift and devastating precision, he slaughtered them all. No male child was spared. Their treasures were plundered. Their people enslaved. The lands fell silent, soaked in loss and ash. But history doesn't end with silence, not in Yoya. It only waits to rise again. With the fall of the giants, the land of Yoya became a land of mourning, a kingdom of widows, mothers, and daughters left behind. Vulnerable and exposed, the women were easy targets for slave traders, wandering raiders, thieves, and barbarian clans. But the women of Yoya refused to break. Instead, they rose. Out of the ashes of their shattered past, they forged a new identity: warriors, guardians, and builders of a new stronghold. They constructed a fortress around their land, a silent declaration that Yoya would never fall so easily again. Word of their resilience began to spread, reaching even the ears of the Circle, the same kings who had once destroyed them. The Circle watched with suspicion and contempt. They recognized the spark of defiance and sought to snuff it out before it could become a flame. To remind Yoya of their place, the kings made demands. Women were to be sent to their palaces, some as offerings to honor their warriors, others as slaves to parade their power. But beneath the surface, these were not mere tokens, they were warnings. Yet the women adapted. And in doing so, they transformed. In the court of kings, the Yoya women became more than spoils of war. Their intelligence, strength, and loyalty quickly set them apart. They became shields to the kings they were forced to serve, trusted protectors in times of battle, and vital companions in times of peace. Some bore the children of their captors, sons who would become princes, heirs to thrones laced with Yoya blood. These women were no longer outsiders, they were bloodline. Some kings, in secret pride and hunger for power, kept the Yoya women close, hoping their offspring would inherit the indomitable spirit of the tribe. Male children were kept within the palaces, while the daughters were sent back to Yoya, strengthening the growing matriarchy. Over time, the Yoya women evolved from slaves and tributes into warriors, confidants, and right hands to the most powerful rulers. They no longer stood in the shadows, they walked beside kings, swords drawn, eyes forward. And while the Circle thought they were taming the women of Yoya, they were unknowingly feeding the fire of a legacy that was far from finished. Centuries passed, and the women of Yoya grew ever stronger. What began as a desperate struggle for survival had evolved into a thriving legacy of warrior queens, disciplined, wise, and unshakable. Their land, once left in ruin, now pulsed with life and power. But the shadow of Kiba still lingered. Though the man was long gone, his ruthless bloodline sat unchallenged on the throne, generation after generation. His name had become legend, both revered and feared, and his descendants inherited not just his crown, but his cruelty, his cunning, and his insatiable thirst for power. Now, ruling in Kiba's name was his descendant, King Ifti, a man carved from the same stone as his ancestor. Swift in battle, sharp in mind, and cold in heart, Ifti was more than just a king, he was the head of the circle. Every 2 seasons, the kings of the circle convened in secret, at a sacred, predetermined site, guarded by the fiercest warriors of every allied kingdom. Together, they plotted the rise and fall of empires, redrew borders, and dictated the fate of nations. But this season would be different. After centuries of unchallenged dominance, something shifted. Whispers spread through the winds like smoke before a fire. Eyes that once cowered were now watching. A new force was rising, one that the circle had long dismissed. The balance of power was trembling, and for the first time in generations, the kings would not face a rebellion. They would face a reckoning. Ifti's royal entourage journeyed from Gati to a northern kingdom within the circle's domain. As always, he did not travel alone. Among the many guards and servants, one figure stood out, tall, striking, and silent. Yuri. She was a Yoya woman, young, fierce, and devastatingly beautiful, her towering frame and muscular build a clear inheritance from the lost Yoya men of old. Her skin shimmered like polished obsidian under the sun, and her eyes carried the quiet weight of a life never lived for herself. She was his shield, trained to die for him without hesitation, and, when commanded, to live only for his desires. That was the only life she had ever known. No dreams. No rebellion. No questions. A Yoya woman's fate is sealed before her first breath, her path not chosen, but carved by centuries of submission and survival. And Yuri had never imagined it could be any other way. The journey itself was smooth, at least for Ifti. He reclined in the lavish comfort of his royal carriage, barely feeling the cobblestones beneath. The roads had been built by the hands of conquered slaves, their blood and sweat pressed into every flattened stone. These paths linked the kingdoms of the circle, ensuring smooth passage for kings and their ambitions. Ifti was nearly dozing when his carriage came to an abrupt halt. The stillness shattered with the sharp ring of steel meeting steel. A clash of swords. He snapped awake. Instinctively, he drew his blade, a finely forged heirloom passed down from King Kiba himself. Its edge gleamed with a deadly history. With one swift motion, he pulled back the velvet curtain, peering outside. All he saw was death. Lifeless bodies sprawled across the road. Blood. Arrows. Broken weapons. A chilling silence, thick with the scent of betrayal. Then, more clashing. Faint, but near. He leapt from the carriage, heart pounding. Guided by the sound, he moved through the trees and brush until he saw them, 2 figures locked in furious combat. One of them was Yuri. She moved like a storm, swift, precise, merciless. But the one she fought was like nothing Ifti had seen before. The stranger's movements were unfamiliar, fluid and unpredictable. He had long, straight hair, pale skin like an albino, and eyes sharp with a wild intelligence. Ifti had seen traders like him before in distant ports, men from faraway coast who bartered salt, silk, and secrets, but this man was no merchant. This man was a threat. And Yuri, his most trusted Yoya, was fighting him with a fire Ifti hadn't seen before. A fire that seemed, somehow, less about protection and more about choice. Yuri fought with every drop of blood in her veins. This man, this stranger, moved like no warrior she had ever faced. How could one man dismantle an entire royal entourage so swiftly, so effortlessly? His arrows had rained down from the bushes with terrifying precision, taking out half the guards before he even revealed himself. And once he stepped into the open, his swordsmanship was like a dance of shadows, unfamiliar, fluid, and completely unpredictable. Only Yuri could match him. Their blades clashed like thunder, neither giving ground. Small cuts bloomed on both their bodies, swift slashes across arms, shoulders, and thighs, tokens of near misses and sharpened instincts. But then, with a flash of motion almost too fast to see, Yuri struck. A short blade from her waist, her last weapon, found its mark. She pierced his side. His breath caught. He staggered. But instead of surrendering, he fled, disappearing into the trees like a wounded phantom. And Yuri followed. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Not even for the king she had sworn to protect with her life. For the first time, she disobeyed that sacred vow. She ran after the stranger. Branches whipped at her face as she plunged into the underbrush, driven by instinct, rage, and something she couldn't quite name. They sprinted deeper and deeper, neither one slowing, neither one thinking of the traps that littered the wilderness, traps set by the Hunger, a notorious band of slave traders known for ensnaring the unsuspecting. Then, suddenly, the earth gave way. They plunged. Together. They hit the ground hard, landing in a deep pit camouflaged with leaves and netting. Dust swirled. Bones ached. But the fight hadn't left them. Even in the trap, they lunged at each other at fists, elbows, grapples. No weapons, just raw strength and rage. They slammed into the walls of the pit, grunting and gasping, refusing to give in. But soon, exhaustion came. Their strength faded. They paused, chest to chest, both panting hard. Only now, as silence settled and the weight of their trap became clear, did reality sink in. They were stuck. Two enemies. Alone. In the same pit. With no weapons, no way out, and no more energy to fight. For the first time, Yuri looked at him not as a target, but as a man, wounded, breathing, alive. And for the first time in her life, she felt something shift inside her. Breathing heavily, they sat still, backs against the dirt walls of the pit, hearts pounding in their chest. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence settled gently over them like dusk. Only now did they hear it, the distant rush of a river, the soft rustle of trees, birds singing somewhere high above. The world, once filled with clashing steel, was suddenly quiet. Then the stranger chuckled. "I'm called Hector," he said between breaths, his voice carrying a note of humor. "And a few other names, if you're interested." Yuri glanced at him, wary but curious. "Why are you different?" "I'm not from this part," he replied. "I'm a mercenary. Hired to kill your king." She tensed. "He's the leader of the circle. He's frightened some very powerful men who want to trade freely in this region. And he doesn't share well." Yuri narrowed her eyes. "How come you speak our language?" "You'd be surprised how many of your people travel," Hector said with a smirk. "I grew up trading with them, living among them. I'm a pirate, mostly. I've been everywhere, seen things your kings would kill to bury." Yuri tilted her head, studying him. "You're skilled. I haven't had a fight like that in a long time." They both laughed, a strange and unexpected sound in such a place. Time passed, and with nowhere to go and no one to fight, they talked of the present, the past, the strange, uncertain future. In their words, walls began to crack, and something raw and human slipped through. "So," Hector asked, his tone softening, "you're really okay with being just a shield? A servant to ruthless kings who see you as property?" Yuri hesitated. "Honestly," she said slowly, "I've never thought about anything else. No one from my tribe does. Our fate is decided before we are born." "You should come with me," he said, a fire flickering in his voice. "See the world. There's beauty out there. Chaos, yes, but also freedom. And freedom is beautiful. Yuri was silent. Then, wordlessly, she reached for the small pouch tied at her waist. From it, she pulled a bottle of crushed herbs, dark and thick, smelling of smoke and bitter root. Gently, she poured it onto the wound in Hector's side. He winced but didn't pull away. She tore a strip of cloth from his garment and wrapped it around him, pressing the makeshift bandage to stop the bleeding. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice lower now, almost surprised. But the quiet didn't last. The sound of boots, cracking twigs, voices. They both froze. The hunger. Slave traders. Ruthless. Opportunistic. Known for setting traps just like the one they'd fallen into. The footsteps grew louder. Yuri and Hector locked eyes. In that instant, something wordless passed between them, understanding, fear, resolve. A moment later, rough hands reached down, yanking them up one by one. Bound and bloodied, they were dragged out and thrown onto a slave cart among others, some unconscious, some already broken. As the wheels rolled forward, dust rising behind them, Yuri stared at the fading trees through the slats of the cart. She had disobeyed a king. She had spoken of freedom. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. After hours on the dusty trail, the hunger slave caravan came to a halt. Some guards wandered into the bush to relieve themselves, while others dozed lazily around the cart. Yuri had stolen a knife from one of the guards, small, sharp, and hidden beneath her skirt. Without hesitation, she cut through the ropes that bound her hands. She glanced at Hector and gave a subtle signal. His eyes lit up with understanding. In one swift moment, the two former enemies became a team, striking down the guards closest to them with brutal efficiency. The ambush was quick, quiet, and effective. But as they made their escape, other hunger men gave chase. Exhausted and bleeding, Yuri and Hector fought their way through the dense bush, only to be surrounded again. Just when hope seemed lost, help arrived, a flash of spears, arrows, and fierce war cries. The Yoya women had come. Yoya never left one of their own behind. Search parties were always dispatched when one of their women went missing. This time was no different, and just in time, they found Yuri and Hector. The hunger men fell quickly under the force of the warrior women, and the pair were rescued. But Hector's relief was short-lived. Back in Yoya, his fate was sealed. As an enemy mercenary, and a man, he was to be executed. It was law. But Yuri had changed. In the dead of night, she crept into his cell, unlocked the door, and led him to the port where his ship and crew waited. Hector was weak, grateful, and overwhelmed. "Come with me," he begged. "See the world. I'll show you freedom." She didn't go. Not yet. Because Yuri understood something now, her people were not truly free. Not under the shadow of the circle, not under Ifti, and not while their destinies were still controlled by the same kings who saw them as pawns. By the time Ifti's men arrived at Yoya to retrieve the mercenary, the cell was empty. It was seen as treason. Ifti was furious. To him, it was proof that the Yoya were conspiring with his enemies. That they had outgrown submission. That they were preparing for war. Yuri knew what she had done, and she knew there was no turning back. So she lit the fire herself. She called every daughter of Yoya back home. She stood in the center of the sacred grounds and declared an uprising. "We will fight to the death," she cried. "Not just for our survival, but for our right to exist, as warriors, as leaders, as free people." The war was brutal. And at first, the circle seemed unstoppable, legions of well-trained soldiers and the might of centuries-old strategy. But just as hope began to fade, Hector returned. And he did not come alone. He brought allies, traders, rebels, warriors from kingdoms once silenced by the circle, now rising in defiance. He brought the very ones who had hired him to kill Ifti. He brought high-grade weapons and men who believed in Yuri's cause. This time, strategy failed. Ifti's enemies were too unpredictable. His plans unraveled. His forces collapsed under the sheer weight of united opposition. He died on the battlefield. And with him, the circle fell. From the ashes of war, something new emerged. Yoya's first queen was crowned, Yuri. The woman who dared to think differently. The woman who disobeyed the king. The woman who freed her people. She became the Oba of kings, the leader who united the broken kingdoms into a new order. And by her side stood Hector, the outsider who showed her what freedom could look like. The streets of Yoya flowed not just with women warriors but with men, children, and elders, all free, all equal, all Yoya. A tribe reborn. A destiny rewritten.